Hey everyone, today I have this beautiful map of the Viennese underground system, and there's a little mystery on there I'm gonna show you. So if we count the underground lines, we have in red the U1, in purple the U2, in orange the U3, then out here in green the U4, and then here's the odd part, it's called ochre, the U6. So we're jumping from the U4 to the U6. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, but the U5 is missing. Where is it? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of how these underground systems come to be. And in fact, we will get a U5 relatively soon. It's currently being built, so I think something like at the end of the 20s it'll be ready, but relatively speaking soon. And I'm just going to show you where it is. But first I think we're going to take a little trip through history. So if we start off in the 19th century, Vienna was a city of 2 million people. And if you've seen one of my previous videos, I'm going to link that somewhere, you might remember that there were a whole lot of train stations. We still have one here, the Franz Josefs Bahnhof. We had here the Paterstern, then here was the Nordwestbahnhof. We have down here the Südbahnhof and Ostbahnhof, together as one today, Hauptbahnhof. And the Westbahnhof over here. So a lot of ways to get out of the city in all directions. But it was quite difficult to get from one station to the next. Or in fact to travel around the city, or the city at the time was this here, but so all the suburbs. And Vienna was growing rapidly until the end of the 19th century. So, starting in about 1840, there were the first plans for not necessarily an underground system, but a railway system within the city. In fact, not just one plan, but I think around 25 plans until the 1870s. However, none of them were realized. Not until almost the end of the 19th century, when finally Vienna got the so-called Stadtbahn. I'll write that down over here. So that was around 1900. It basically means Stadt, that's the city, and Bahn, that's the railway. So railway inside the city. Now we still have, actually more than just traces of that. We're still using these lines today. One of them is what's become the U4, which runs along the Donaukanal, which we see here. And then here it follows the Wienfluss, so the Wien. I don't know if it's really a river. It's very, very small. But it's right here next to the underground line. The other line is here in locker, the U6, which runs along the so-called Gürtel, so that's a big city highway, I guess you could say. Quite busy here. And in fact, a third line, which we're just going to mention quickly, out here, Penzing, Breitensee oder Kringenhals, Gersthof, Grottenbachstraße, Oberdoubling, Heiligenstadt. So that's part of the S-Bahn nowadays, one of the rail lines that runs on the outside of the city. So we're still using these today, but at the time they were called Stadtbahn, not U-Bahn. And they were the only kind of public transport system on rails. Everything else was just tram lines or buses, but there was no underground system or anything else. It's not like there weren't plans, but somehow it was never realized. And of course you have to remember this here, the U6 runs overground, and at the time the trains were run with coal, so if you lived somewhere along the street, I think it was quite unpleasant. That was until 1925, and then the Stadtbahn got electrified and it was a little cleaner. So in 1925, the political landscape in Austria had changed quite significantly. There was a new republic. Austria was a lot smaller than it was before, and Vienna was shrinking. There were about 2 million people by 1900, but until the end of the Second World War, Vienna shrank to about 1.5 million and stayed there for a long time. Plus, with the 50s and 60s, you might notice from your city or wherever you live, cars were really popular, and there weren't really any plans to build another underground system. The party in power was really against it. They would rather put the money into building public housing and not so much into an underground line. So nothing happened for a long time. In fact, the only thing they did do was to put public transport underground, but not by building new underground systems, but by putting the existing tram lines underground, for example here. So this area is at the heart of Vienna, basically. This is the so-called Ringstraße, where you would have Rathaus, so the city hall, you would have the parliament here, the Burgtheater, so the big main theater. Here would be the Hofburg, so the former quarter of the Habsburgs, where today you would have the president, like I said, parliament just across. So this area was really, really busy. And in fact, the ring runs in two lines. An inner line, the so-called ring, and an outer line, the so-called Zweierlinie, the second line. And there were some trams going along the outer line that were put underground, going from Museumsquartier to Volkstheater to, there was another stop here called Lerchenfelder Gasse, to Rathaus. Funnily, none of the stops had the same name at the time. They were called Mary-Hilfer-Straße, Burggasse, well, like I said, Lerchenfelder Gasse, and Friedrich-Schmid-Platz. So, from here to here, you had the so-called Ustrap, Untergrundstraßenbahn. Let's put a little note here. Well, let's put it down here. So this was in this area, and it was also realized in this area here, where today you would have the main train station towards Matzleinsdorfer Platz. There are about 6 stops to the underground here and are still being used today. And we're going to come back here towards the end of the video because these underground lines are probably going to become important again. So in this area here we have another Ostrap system. Alright, so those were the plans at the time, but I think quickly became evident that something else had to be done. A lot of people, of course, were coming into Vienna by car. People living in Vienna could afford cars, maybe 2 cars per family as you would have, and had to get around, and there was just so much traffic. Can you imagine at the time you could even go to Stephansplatz and park your car right in front of the cathedral? So today all of that is just for walking. You have these nice shopping streets, etc. A lot of cafes outside. But at the time all of this was for cars. So finally in the 1960s the city government decided to change something. In 1968 it was decided to build an underground system, and work began 1 year later in 1969. And the first part that was going to be built was this part here. So exactly where there'd already been put an underground tram, but they were going to add an actual underground railway too. So from Reumannplatz to Karlsplatz, because they felt this was one of the busiest areas of the city. And this line was officially opened in 1978. So you might think, okay, that's quite short, that's only 4 stops. Of course, the U1 was relatively quickly expanded, I think towards Praterstern. And they also changed this part here to an actual underground. So the U2 was also one of the first actual underground lines. They added this tunnel here towards Karlsplatz, so you could change to the U1 and what at the time was still the Stadtbahn. And on the other side they added the tunnel here to Schottentor and to Schottenring. So when I came to Vienna I still knew the U2 as going from Karlsplatz to Schottenring. So a really short line. It was really quite peculiar because of course it had been built for a tram system, so these stops were really quite closely together. And still today, if you stand here at Museums Quarter and you look down into the tunnel, you can actually see the next station basically just across. So this is also the reason why this stop here eventually was abandoned in 2003. There were just too many stops here. So we have 1 line, 2, and part of the Stadtbahn was also completely refurbished. All the technical equipment was changed out and it was turned into the U4 that again went from Hütteldorf here towards Schönbrunn. So this is where you would have the castle. Over here to Karlsplatz, the main underground station at the time, to Stadtpark, Landstraße, Schwedenplatz, per Schottenring, Rossauerlände, Friedensbrücke, and up towards Heiligenstadt. This stop here, Spittelau, at the time did not yet exist. just like here on the other side, Lingenfeldgasse. So you notice these are the two stations where the U4 and the U6 cross. And they are both relatively new. They were added later, so it would be easier to change between the two lines. The other stations, like here, Pilgrimgasse, Kettenbrückengasse, Stadtpark, these are quite old. They're still from Otto Wagner, so from around 1900, and really beautiful and really very spacious for an underground station. All right. So we're here at the end of the first stage of building the underground, and we already have a gap in the numbers. We have the U1, the U2 and the U4, but only 3 lines. And that is because when they started building the whole system according to one plan. And that plan already had a U3 in it. So when they were digging here at Stephansplatz, at the time, of course, people were only using the U1, but the tunnel for the U3 was laid at the same time. And the U3 was opened not that much later. The second stage of expanding the underground system was in the 90s. And the U3 started here from Erdberg to Volkstheater. But until 2000 it had reached what I think is its final length to Simmering. And on the other side to Otterkring. So this was quite an important line, of course, because if you look here, you get to Westbahnhof. And for a long time, this was the most important train station in Vienna. It would take you west out of the city towards Lower Austria, Upper Austria, Salzburg. You could go to Germany, etc. Whereas the Südbahnhof wasn't used that much. So this was an important line. And if you came into Vienna and you would arrive here, you could get on the U3. You could go past Zieglergasse, Neubaugasse, Volkstheater, Herrengasse, right here to Stephansplatz and come out right by the cathedral and take a stroll around the center. So of course this was an important line, and it's really quite busy to this day, especially this part here. I feel like any time I get on it, it's completely full. Well, not this year, but under normal circumstances. Alright, so the first gap in the numbering system's been filled. The U3 has been built. At the same time, the U6 was also finally turned into what is now the U6, because until about 1990 it still ran as Stadtbahn, so just like it was originally built. Initially it was a bit shorter. It went here from I think Meidlinger Hauptstraße was the main station where you could change, via Gumpendorfer Straße to Westbahnhof, Burggasse. Thalia Straße is one of the newest stations, so that's not an original one. Josefstädter Straße, Alserstraße. Here you have the big and quite odd-looking main hospital of Vienna. Here's another opera, Nussdorfer Straße, and like I said, Spittelau is one of the newest stations. Initially the U6 also went up here towards Heiligenstadt. And like I said, it runs overground, so you have these big arches that still exist today, but that are not used anymore by this line. Instead, over the course of the 90s, it was extended north across the Danube towards Floridsdorf, And on the other side, it was also extended here through Meidling down to Alt-Erla, a really, really big apartment block here, very famous, all the way down to Siebenhirten. So the somewhat odd thing about the U6 is that it does not look like the other train lines. In order to preserve the way that it was built, they had to buy different trains for this line. So for a long time, they looked like the normal tram lines. And to this day, the U6 is sort of the odd one out. It looks a little differently. All the main part of it runs overground. It has a bit of a reputation too sometimes, but of course it's a really useful line, and I have to say, I really like this part here when you can look outside and you see all the buildings left and right. They're just normal flats. You can see the lights inside and you can look down on the street. So I don't know, there's something really very peculiar city feeling here, I think, in this area that I like very much. Alright, so we are about in the year 2000 and we have a fully functioning underground system, but it's not finished yet. So there's been a lot of work done since then. For one, you might remember that in 2008 there was a big European Football Cup, and that took place in Austria and Switzerland. So it was important that you could get to the stadium with an underground line. So the year 2 was extended over here, not quite yet across the Danube, but along the Danube. And this line here was opened in 2008. The line was further extended finally across the Danube, here Donaustadtbrücke, Stadtlau, Hadegasse, Donauspital, so towards another hospital. And finally Aspenstraße, Hausfeldstraße, Aspen Nord and Seestadt. I've already talked a little bit about the Seestadt. You can see the little lake here, and a whole new city is being built around it for 20,000 people. So of course it was important to put an underground line here. It was finished in 2013, and initially it was a bit odd because the apartment blocks are still being built. I think they're not even halfway through yet. So if you do go on that underground line, it feels like you're just going through open fields here on an underground line. And in fact, here in this area, there's a lot of construction work happening. I think all this part here is really a new quarter of Vienna. So basically, underground was built first, and then the building work followed. So the U2 definitely has seen a lot of change. But not just the U2. Over here, along the U1, for a long time it stopped at Kagran, but it was extended towards Leopoldau, which was opened in 2006, so a little bit earlier. And recently there's been some extension work down here that we don't have on this map yet because it's so new. So let's put it in. We have Troststraße, Altes Landgut, Alaudergasse, Noila, and the final stop would be Opala. So, which was opened in 2017. The U3 hasn't really changed since 2000, so since it was finished. And neither has the U4. Alright, but now we're still at the mystery of the missing U5. Like I said, there was a plan initially that did include a U5, but it was meant to be right here, where today we have the U2. And I think that was decided pretty early on, so the U5 was abandoned in this place. Then there were thoughts about building the U5 down here. From Bahnhof Meiling, I think it was supposed to start, where we already have these kind of underground systems around Matzleinsdorfer Platz, all the way over here to St. Mark's. But that too was abandoned. We even had plans not for a U5 but for a U7 all the way on the other side of the Danube. That wasn't built either. But in 2014 it was decided that finally the time has come to build a U5. Now, this is quite interesting because of course the U2 today includes part of what was supposed to be the U5. And that's going to stay that way because the U5 and the U2 are going to be right here at Rathausplatz. This here is going to stay the way it is. This will be the U2. But here the U2 is going to take a different course. It's not going to continue south to Volkstheater, but instead to Neubaugasse, then south to Pilgrimgasse, from there to Matzleinsdorfer Platz. And from Matzleinsdorfer Platz there's going to be another at least 2 stops. One's going to be Großregelgasse, and the final stop, or the way it's planned for now, is going to be Wienerberg. But I think there's options to continue even further. So this is going to be the final stop of the U2. It's going to be quite a long line in the end. If you consider that for the longest time it was just this little half moon. Alright, so we have a different course for the U2, but we still don't know where the U5 is going to be. The U5 is going to be this initial line right here from Karlsplatz to Museumsquartier to Volkstheater to Rathaus. And then it's going to continue up here to Michelbeuern AKH, to the hospital. There's going to be stations at Altes AKH. So this is not a hospital anymore. This is a former hospital that's now used as a university building. And there's going to be another stop here at Arne Carlsson Park. Right, just about enough space. And then there's going to be another stop. Let's see, how do we put that in? like this. Ett Elterleinplatz. So here we have the U5. The U5 is going to be light blue or turquoise. Unfortunately, I don't have a turquoise color here right now, so let's use this pink. I'm going to go up here to Rathaus and then out through the 9th district, across the Gürtel, into the other districts. And then finally, the question will have been answered. Where's the U5? And from what I know, the U5 is supposed to open in 2028. Probably not the whole line, but at least parts of it. So let's see. Alright, so let's do a quick recap of all the information that we have here on the map. Like I said, the first plans date from 1840, but it took until about 1900 for the first lines to be operational, which was the Stadtbahn here, here, and here. Then in the 1960s, we had some underground tram lines here and here. And finally, almost 1980, the U1 opened, starting at Heumannplatz, through the city centre, and then soon being extended across the Danube. We had the Untergrundstraßenbahn turned into the first part of the U2. In the 90s, the U3 was added. The U6 was extended both in the north as well as in the south. Finally, the U1 has been expanded, again in the south and the north. The U2 goes all the way to Seestadt in the east, on the other side of the Danube. And right now you have a lot of construction work happening here at Pilgrimgasse, Neubaugasse. I haven't been to Rathaus in a while, but I guess it's going to be the same there. And then soon you're going to have a new U5 taking over the initial line of the U2, and the U2 continuing down here. And you can go all the way to Wienerberg, which is a really, really big and a beautiful park. So that's going to be very nice. Alright. So I think that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this. And you feel really relaxed now. Maybe ready for sleep. And I hope I'll see you again soon.